agenda is set. Hello, everyone. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. You know big tobacco. Imagine big weed. The new high over legal marijuana. That and more today. It's time to talk. Not on our shores. Australia has a new policy to deflect asylum seekers, send them to another country. Well, today we'll talk about the pros and cons of outsourcing management of the boat people. Well, if you think the Netherlands is the land of plenty for pot users, let me redirect you to South America. Uruguay is set to become the first country where you can grow, sell, buy, and use marijuana legally. Joints could become as mainstream as cigarettes. And does this mean the beginning of the end of the drug war? And if you didn't know that a major national election is just around the corner here in Germany, well, join the club. It's not even chit-chat material here. Angela Merkel wants another term as Chancellor of Germany. You see her right there, but she'll have to convince an unprecedented number of people to make the effort and vote. Political apathy at an all-time high in Germany. What will it take to get voters excited again? Well, I've invited three people today to talk, argue, and pry apart these headlines. My first guest's claim to fame so far is, I guess I have to say this, is being young and naive. He is a journalist who has gotten a lot of attention with an online interview series that's called Young and Naive. Thilo Jung is with us today. Thilo, you've got some ideas about why Germans have lost their mojo when it comes to politics, and we're going to talk about that with you a little bit later on in the show. My second guest was at the front line in the late 60s when a generation became associated with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I'm happy to welcome one of the original hippies, Rainer Langhans. He's the co-founder of Kommune 1. It was the first politically motivated commune here in Germany, Mr. Langhans. You were open about enjoying a joint back then. Today, though, your opinions on marijuana and drugs are a little bit different, and they'll help us understand what Uruguay can mean for the rest of the world. So glad to have you on the show today. And my next guest says that Australia's asylum policy is designed to stop a flood of human trafficking victims. I'm happy to welcome to the show the ambassador of Australia to Germany, Mr. Peter Tesch. He says that the policy is telling asylum seekers that you can't simply pick Australia as your destination, Mr. Tesch. And you say that it might also be a good idea for Europe. But this notion of sending boat people to another country, to Papua New Guinea, is it a morally sound one?
Is it morally sound to stand idly by and watch unscrupulous profiteers, people smugglers, willing to exploit vulnerable, desperate people, taking the money, putting them on ramshackle boats and just sending them off into the great blue unknown, not caring whether they drown en route to the better future that they seek?
All right, well, I'm going to pick up on that in a moment. A lot of questions to ask about that. The United Nations does not approve of how Australia is dealing with the boat people. Under the new policy, asylum seekers headed for Australia will end up in Papua New Guinea to be resettled. The UN High Commission for Refugees says that there are significant shortcomings in how Papua New Guinea processes asylum seekers. In short, the UN is concerned that Australia is simply pushing people from one dangerous situation into another.
Since 2001, at least 1,000 people have died while trying to reach Australia's Indian Ocean territory of Christmas Island in unseaworthy boats. More than 15,000 asylum seekers have arrived by boat in Australian territory so far this year. Australia's government has responded by implementing what it calls its new offshore resettlement program. Papua New Guinea and the tiny island state of Nauru are receiving hundreds of millions of euros to deal with the unwanted immigrants.
If you're seeking to take the dangerous passage by boat, my message as Prime Minister of Australia is simply this: don't.
While Australia's leadership says these agreements are aimed at combating human smugglers, critics say Australia is shirking its obligations and outsourcing its immigration problem to developing nations.
Ambassador, why not spend the money on a detention facility in Australia? Or if you're going to spend all the money that you're spending in Papua New Guinea, why not go to countries where you're getting most of these asylum seekers and give them good boats so that they can come over to Australia safely?
The thing people shouldn't lose sight of in this discussion is that Australia has in fact increased its annual intake of humanitarian migrants. What we're saying is there is a need to tackle unauthorised maritime arrivals. There is a need to tackle the scourge of people smuggling. That involves national, regional and international measures.
But why are you involving a third country in this? You have the country of origin for these people, you have Australia, and now you have Papua New Guinea. Why deflect them to another country? I mean, you are outsourcing. You don't want to have them on Australian soil.
It's not a question of saying we don't want to have asylum seekers on Australian soil. What we need is a multi-tiered approach to tackling the problem of people smuggling. This is not directed at asylum seekers. This is not directed at genuine asylum seekers who are using orderly established processes under the UNHCR or the IOM try to improve their well-being or flee persecution.
If someone is a boat person and wants to come to Australia, they're going to end up in Papua New Guinea now. How can you be sure that the process is in place to determine whether or not these people are true asylum seekers? And if they are and want to go to Australia, you're closing the door to them. You're saying they cannot come to Australia.
If they are asylum seekers and are fleeing persecution, their intention, their ambition is to get to a country of first asylum. That does not necessarily mean that it is Australia. Our Foreign Minister has spoken of economic migrants. Our Foreign Minister has spoken of economic migrants. If people want to choose their destination, then it makes you question, are they fleeing persecution or are they seeking to improve their lives and well-being? Both equally valid objectives. The question is, how do you pursue those objectives? Through an orderly system of migration, which is championed and supported by institutions such as the UNHCR and the IOM, or by simply seeking out shady characters who are willing to pocket your money and put your lives at risk?
You've got authorities to fight trafficking, and I'll ask the other gentleman at the table here, but I mean, it's just human nature that people in that part of the world are going to want to go to Australia. You know, you are one of the richest countries there. And I can imagine that if we were asylum seekers, if we were refugees, we would want a ticket to the best place possible, right?
Absolutely.
Same holds true for Germany. 64,000 asylum seekers arrived in Germany last year. Ask the German taxpayers and voters, should people, should governments, should migration systems be undermined simply to accommodate the desires of people and to support those who would seek to profit from them?
Ryan, what do you think about this policy? I mean, you come from a completely different era when people were socialized about human rights and about looking at the other. What's Australia doing?
I would say they should better the conditions in the home countries of these people, so they must not flee from them. And after that, the question arises of this coming to Australia, to Germany, or from Africa in our case. Mm-hmm. And I would say that's coming of this bad situation of these countries they are coming from. And that's the trade conditions we have.
I mean, they're coming from bad places, but Thilo, aren't they being sent to a place that's not exactly the best place?
Papua New Guinea?
Right.
Well, I don't know much about it, but it doesn't sound like the best place. And you were just mentioning human rights. I think it's a human right to choose wherever you want to live in the world, because the greatest luck as a human being is to be born in a place like Australia.
But Australia is saying that that is not a human right. Australia is saying that you've said...
I'm going to interrupt you right there. That is not what Australia is saying. Australia maintains a very deliberate, very well-structured, orderly migration program. We are one of a very small number of countries in the world that actively advocates migration to Australia.
Yeah, but you're saying these boat people cannot come to Australia.
In relation to asylum seekers and humanitarian cases in close cooperation with UNHCR and the IOM. The government is absolutely satisfied, as a long-standing member of these institutions, that what we are doing is consistent with our obligations, which is to ensure effective protection for asylum seekers.
Can you assure that these people will
to ensure that they will not be returned to a country from which they are fleeing persecution?
But can you assure that the people, when they go to Papua New Guinea, that they will be protected, that they will not be in harm's way? Is Australia guaranteeing that by outsourcing this?
What is happening under this arrangement is that Papua New Guinea, which is a signatory to the Refugees Convention, is saying we undertake to abide by our obligations under that convention. Papua New Guinea needs support to increase its capacity to deal with this, and that is part of the arrangements that Australia is putting in place with PNG. Are you
policing what's going on in Papua New Guinea, though?
This is a matter of PNG law. This is an area of PNG sovereignty. What we are doing is ensuring that we can provide, through development assistance and through other support mechanisms, assistance to enable Papua New Guinea to improve in areas where it currently perhaps doesn't have the capacities to quite the degree that it believes it should. But it is made very clear, as the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea and our Prime Minister did during their press conference in mid-July in Brisbane, this is a commitment that PNG has entered upon in full knowledge of the obligations that it has, and that is to ensure effective protection for these people, if found to be genuine refugees.
I'm wondering what happens to someone coming from, let's say, an Islamic country who's gay or who's a lesbian, and they want to come to Australia because they're being persecuted because of their sexuality. And they want to come to Australia, but instead they're sent to Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea told the United Nations in 2011 that it would not decriminalize homosexuality. Men who engage in same-sex sexual behavior are penalized up to 14 years in prison. So you cannot guarantee that the legal system in Papua New Guinea will protect minorities the way it would in Australia.
What I think you're losing sight of here is that we are talking about a small group of people who arrive in irregular manner by boat through
it's no
paying
less,
people
though,
smugglers.
Ambassador.
But the point is there are avenues available, and I want to go back to a point that Rainer Langhans made before. This, as our Prime Minister has made clear, is not a subject that any single nation can deal with in isolation. We have seen, including through the work over the last few years of the Bali process, the importance of regional cooperation. The Bali process involves countries throughout the Southeast Asian and Southwest Pacific region, including Australia. We have seen our Prime Minister say that there needs to be an international conference, because this is not a problem unique to our region. Ask people in North Africa, ask people in Syria. And to come back to the point that Rainer Langhans made, tackling some of these issues at source by improving conditions in country, by working to overcome the causes of people seeking to better their lives or to flee persecution is one part of it.
You have your foreign aid programs. I don't think anyone's disputing that, but obviously there are still reasons why people are persecuted, be it, their sexual minorities for religion or whatever reasons. I mean, is this morally...
Is it mostly economic reasons?
Well, it may be, but my question is this a morally legitimate solution that Australia is doing? Aren't they abdicating responsibility for the people who land on their shores?
For me, it sounds like an insane political competition in humanity. I mean, the two parties are toppling themselves with new ways of getting rid of those immigrants. And I still don't get what the real problem here is. I mean, he's talking about boats and smugglers. Why don't they start fighting them and then take care of the really poor?
Well, is this an admission that your Coast Guard fails in its efforts to stop human trafficking on the high seas?
Have you ever flown to Australia over the vast tracts of water that exist between us and the rest of the world? It's not a question of an attempt to politically top people. This is an issue that has been around for a very long time in Australia. We are talking about a segment of the flow of people that needs to be addressed and has got to be addressed not just by nations but by regional and international cooperation. We have a very good dialogue with Indonesia, and indeed one of the first things Prime Minister Rudd did was go and visit Indonesia, because we recognise that Indonesia also has a huge problem as a transit country. And you can't simply say, you've made it to Indonesia, it's Indonesia's problem. You can't simply say, we're going to take people and return them to Indonesia and leave it up to Indonesia.
But I'm wondering what people would think in Germany, for example, if people are coming into Germany and seeking asylum, and if the Germans said, no, you're not allowed on German soil, we're going to send you to Iceland. Huh. Now, would that be politically acceptable here?
It'd be outrageous. I mean, in the end, we still have to take care of those people. And if they choose to come here, it'd be the most minimal thing would be to at least give them a chance to just at least stay here a little while.
And wouldn't it be cheaper, Ambassador, to take these people in and integrate them into society and the economy? I mean, you're a rich nation.
We've taken 210,000 people this year across our regular migration, which consists of skilled migration, which is one of the areas that Germany is also investigating, through family reunion and humanitarian. So nobody should be in any doubt about Australia's commitment. We are a country built on immigration. We are a country built on assimilation of people and a respect for their cultural backgrounds and their beliefs. 50% of the Australian population has a migration background. The question we're talking about here is, what is one of a number of measures that's needed to tackle a very specific component of a problem. And the undertaking in this refugee settlement arrangement is that people who seek through irregular means to escape persecution will be processed, their cases will be reviewed, consistent with UNHCR,
will they
with
be
IOM,
able to come to Australia?
And they will be able to find a place of effective protection. But if you think,
but not Australia,
think that circumventing the processes, paying people smugglers who promise you a solution that they can't deliver is the way to go, that's what this policy is about.
But people seeking asylum usually don't have the money to have proper ways of transportation. That's why they're on boats.
Mr. Langhans' point.
I know, but
where do they get the money from to pay as people smugglers?
But the point of this policy is these people do not have the option of coming to Australia. Are we honest about that? They cannot come to Australia.
The Prime Minister has made very clear that unauthorised maritime arrivals reaching Australian waters after the 19th of July will be processed with a view, if their claims to asylum are found to be valid, to being resettled in Papua New Guinea or in Nauru, or if this set of arrangements is expanded elsewhere,
Thilo,
that will be what will happen.
Really quickly, we have to move on.
Could you explain what an authorised maritime arrival would be?
I'm talking about those who come through the UNHCR or the IOM processes. People arrive in Australia through legitimate, orderly managed means where they are processed through UNHCR facilities in other countries. If they are found to be genuine refugees, Australia bears its fair share of the burden in saying, we have a program this year, 20,000 people. It's been increased from 13,700. So we stand ready to further increase that humanitarian intake. That's the difference between orderly asylum-seeking processes and those who simply try to find a shortcut using unscrupulous profiteers.
We have to move on. Just a final question. I know we have an election that's been called for next month. The timing of this obviously looks rather suspicious. This new policy, we've got an election coming in. Is Mr. Rudd hoping that by defending the borders of Australia from boat people, he's going to win some votes?
I think it looks suspicious to cynical minds. I think this is an issue.
Politicians are known for being cynical.
Well, journalists are perhaps also, let's say, sceptical, critical appraisers of facts.
Thank goodness.
But the important thing is that this is not a new issue in Australia's political history. We have seen a dramatic increase in the last few months in the number of attempted arrivals by boat and a dramatic increase in the number of drownings. Nobody could simply say, well, we can't do anything about this for fear that people might think we're trying to politicise it. Okay. That is not a moral or a responsible position.
We have to move on. We've got to move on. My producer is saying we have to move on. We're going to run out of time. I was in Amsterdam this past weekend, and I spoke with a lot of locals about the pros and cons of legalized marijuana there. And, of course, there are plenty of coffee shops to have that conversation in, as you probably know. You won't find many people who think that the future would be better if there were more controls on pot or similar drugs. across the globe, and especially in Uruguay, they are making the Dutch look almost old-fashioned. In Uruguay, a joint is about to become as legal as a cigarette.
Uruguay looks set to become the first country to legalise the production, sale and consumption of marijuana for recreational use. The bill has already passed the lower house and is on its way to the Senate for final approval. Despite Uruguay's small size, the country has a population of just 3 million people. Experts say this experiment could have far-reaching consequences if other countries in the region follow Uruguay's lead. The US states of Washington and Colorado have already adopted similar laws. There, the marijuana business is booming, as there is no lack of demand.
Ryan, what do you say of this, what's happening in Uruguay? Is it about time?
Really?
Overdue?
Oh, it's since 50 years we have this discussion, and I would say it's good that they will begin with it. Amsterdam has begun with it, and I think this Uruguayan thing is very important for the South American or the North American people, that they will begin with it, ending the war on drugs.
Are you surprised that this is coming from South America? It's almost a little counterintuitive, right? We would think it would come from Europe, Amsterdam being the example. But it's coming from South America. How do you explain that?
Not really, because they are producing the drugs, mostly. And therefore they have the problems bigger than other countries, as the United States also especially. And therefore they are really the people who are suffering from this war on drugs.
The United States has
failed, of course.
Which a lot of people would say has failed in the war on drugs. The United States has been funneling in a lot of money to Uruguay to get this legislation passed. There are some people who say that Uruguay is being used as a test case to see what happens when marijuana is legalized. Do you think that we are going to see a movement across the world where marijuana is going to become as commonplace or as legal as tobacco?
I don't know. That would be good. Or instead of alcohol, I would say that's more important than the cigarettes. I don't know if this development in America is influencing our situation in Europe. It was quite distinct from that. So I think it's a signal, but I don't know that we will discuss it.
The taboos are being broken, though, with this type of legislation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, finally, it's as you mentioned, the drug war has failed. It has never worked. And it's proven that instead of fighting drugs, it's way cheaper, it's way more effective, and it's better to invest in prevention, in treatment, and also in better education about it.
Ambassador, would this be something for Australia?
Highly unlikely.
You don't see people smoking joints in Sydney on the street.
No, you don't see them smoking joints in Sydney on the street. There might be other parts of the country where they smoke them, but no, we have a national drug strategy which is focused on 3 pillars of demand reduction, supply reduction, and harm reduction. And I think education is an incredibly important part. We're seeing this in Australia with regard to tobacco, for example, where we have been in the forefront of introducing plain packaging regulation, which, according to the experts, has had a measurable effect on reducing demand for tobacco. The question to me is whether or not an approach such as is being contemplated in Uruguay is going to expand the problem or reduce the effects.
It may reduce cigarette sales, and it may increase joint sales. I mean, there are reports that the big tobacco companies are already inquiring in Uruguay about setting up big weed companies instead of big tobacco companies.
I mean, the great thing about Uruguay is that it's legal now, so people can grow it themselves. They can grow their own medicine in their back garden. I mean, that's why in the West, especially, just look at Big Pharma. They hate the idea of free drugs in the garden.
At home. Reiner, I mean, you've been a man who has known pot for a long time. is when you look back with your experiences with it, and you've known lots of people who have used drugs, is it as harmless as it's being made to seem in Uruguay? I mean, you're a man with a lot of experience.
I would say it's the best drug, the best soft drug we have. And in relation to alcohol especially, it's much more better, of course. We know that. But we are not used to it, and therefore they are saying, no, alcohol we know, and that we don't know. But after 50 years we can say we know it, and therefore I would say it's much more better.
Would you say everybody needs to be able to smoke a joint now and then?
Of course.
Yeah. I mean, and compared to tobacco,
try it.
I mean, compared to tobacco, tobacco is way more harmful than any other drug, except maybe sugar or something. So it's amazing that in the West, tobacco is legal and marijuana is illegal.
It is an excellent point. You know, I grew up in the U.S. South, and you know, on a tobacco plantation, and you know, we know tobacco kills people, but it was considered completely normal. But no one would have thought about marijuana, and now it's changing. And now you're asking me, Reiner, you know, you're telling me I should try a joint sometimes. You know, it wasn't that long ago when, you know, U.S. presidential candidates could have to drop out of the race if they admitted to smoking a joint. I mean, things have changed.
Well, and still, we were mentioning the drug war. This drug war is still going on. And look at Obama. I mean, he admitted that he smoked a joint, several joints. There was a pothead in his college years.
There's a pothead in every college year. Yes.
And the fun fact is that he, if he would have been caught smoking that, he would never become
president. Exactly.
And now he's implementing the opposite policy.
The doctors do not agree with this stance, though. The doctors in Uruguay, the medical association, they are against the legislation. They say that the long-term effects of using marijuana are still worse than someone who has a drink every now and then over a lifetime. You know, they dispute what you say right now.
For alcohol instead of that?
Well,
I mean, do you still smoke marijuana, right?
I used to, yes.
Yeah, but you don't smoke it anymore.
No.
Why not?
Because I found better drugs after that. It's a drug for the beginning, to get out of the body, to get into other spaces of our consciousness.
But you see, you say it's a drug. It's a drug for the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean that
for beginners.
For beginners. Yes. But see, a lot of people say it's the drug that takes you to harder drugs, like heroin, for example, crack.
It's not a gateway drug.
No.
Alcohol is a gateway drug, not weed.
No.
Alcohol is a gateway drug to what?
To everything else.
It's interesting. I mean, I have observed from the sidelines in the Netherlands this decision to tighten up on access to cafes there. You have to prove residency now. And I'm just curious what your sense is of that. Is that because of concern that the Netherlands was at risk, or Amsterdam was at risk of becoming a magnet for people from all over? Right. Does this suggest concern about the long-term effects, societal effects, health effects, the costs associated with dealing perhaps 30 years later with cannabis-induced health problems?
Well, and when you talk about costs in a society, we're mentioning alcohol and tobacco, the cost for that on the health of the population is way higher than marijuana would ever do. And you were mentioning studies. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're a pothead and compare that to having a drink every once in a while, of course it's more harmful. But you have to compare it at both levels. I mean, right. If you're a pothead or an alcoholic, what's more dangerous?
What doesn't make sense in Western society is this attitude we have, this instinctive attitude we have that marijuana is something more sinister than alcohol or tobacco. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. And why can't countries like the United States or Australia, why can't they come into the 21st century and at least admit that tobacco and alcohol can be just as bad, if not worse, than marijuana?
Well, speaking for Australia, we've already made very clear that in the view of the government, the costs to society, the costs to the individual of dealing with the long-term effects of tobacco are enormous. And prevention is much, much better than trying to deal with treatment, perhaps 30 or 40 years later when issues arise. And I think there's a false arithmetic here that suggests that because cannabis might be thus far believed to be less damaging than tobacco or alcohol, an increase in cannabis use is somehow more acceptable than saying we need to work on reducing the demand for and therefore the consequences of tobacco and alcohol and drug use.
But we have a double standard, though. We say an increase in using cannabis is not acceptable, but an increase in alcohol use or tobacco use, while we don't condone it, you can still do it legally. Right. And that's what's going on in Western societies. We have this double standard. And, Reiner, have the hippies let us down? I mean, wasn't it your generation that was going to give us enlightenment through drugs like cannabis to show us another plane of existence that would make life better for us?
I would say let them take all drugs they want to take. And the second thing, educate them how to use them. That's good. And not to forbid some drug.
Right.
That's useless. We have seen it from the prohibition experience
That's true.
And therefore do it. Better education.
Okay.
That's all.
And also tight regulations. I mean, careful, tight regulations.
Yeah, I know.
The next step must be taxation.
Of
Turn
course.
it into a revenue stream for government.
Exactly.
So that pays for itself. Prevention, treatment, regulation.
Let that joint.
I think there's that false arithmetic.
Ambassador, I think it would be great if if we knew that you were smoking a joint and there was a tax on that joint that paid for better immigration policies, for example.
If you knew that I was smoking a joint, it wouldn't be in my official capacity. And let me just say, for the record, I've never smoked, I've never inhaled.
Okay, he's never inhaled, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. All right, let's move on. The Euro crisis bailing out Southern Europe. Germany, the paymaster of Europe. These are all huge topics that you think would have people hitting the campaign trail with zest now that the general election here in Germany is just 6 weeks away. Well, in this hot summer, people are not talking politics. For the first time in German history, non-voters may make up the largest voting bloc. People are simply not excited about their political system, and they are tuning out the government. So how can that be changed? Well, we're going to talk about a young and naive approach in just a moment. But first, take a look at this.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel on the campaign trail again. Her prospects look good. With less than 2 months to go, a comfortable majority for her coalition is predicted. The election has so far failed to excite voters. Interest in mainstream politics is waning to such an extent that this time around non-voters could comprise the biggest electoral bloc. Growing numbers believe political parties are more interested in power than the welfare of citizens. This, experts warn, could pose a serious threat to Germany's democracy.
Wow, I mean, that's dire. A serious threat to Germany's democracy. Thilo, is that what we're looking at?
Absolutely.
So what are you doing to save German democracy?
Well, I try to talk about politics and political topics in a different fashion. I try to play a character that doesn't understand the political logics. I mean, just because something is rational, that something is a logical next step of something. I mean, we were talking about the drug war, about refugee things. The human logic is, well, we help them. We take care of them, we take them in, and then maybe we'll help them do whatever they want.
So you're taking topics like, for example, the Eurozone debt crisis, the drug war, and you're conducting interviews with politicians?
Well, politicians, experts, journalists, and so on.
And you call it young and naive because you're asking very simple and even naive questions.
Yeah, because I think that's the problem with the media landscape. They don't ask those questions anymore, and the people, of course, they get the news every day, but they don't understand the news because they don't know the background anymore. So I try to, of course, talk about the current topic, but also make sure to try to provide a background for them.
You're being a teacher,
yes,
in a way, and do you sometimes feel like you're doing kind of like a Colbert Report or a Jon Stewart, because you're also being a little satirical with this approach, or, right? I mean, you're poking fun at the system.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, as I said, I play a character, so of course you have to play with humor a lot, and especially when I talk to politicians, I have to provoke them with not only simple questions, but also satirical questions.
Is this needed, Rainer? I mean, when you look back at how things were in the 60s and the early 70s, the changes?
It's the same we are coming from. Really being naive. Is that human? What are you saying? What kind of speech do you have? What kind of behavior do we have with each other and so on? We saw the world with different eyes, with naive eyes, and saying we must get together in quite different way. We are loving, and not always speaking in an aggressive way with each other. And I think that's a...
But the fact that Thilo has to do this is also, it's almost an indictment against what you tried to do, right? It says that you failed.
I don't think so. No. And it seems so, yes, of course. Because we thought when we will want a new world, new mankind, then it must be subito, at once. Mm-hmm. But that failed.
Right.
But in the long run, we are successful. Now, in the net, there is existing this new world, and the younger people are therefore critical of this normal old representative democracy, and they are
trying to create
for
something
a new kind of democracy where everybody can be a politician.
Ambassador, what do you say about this? Are the politicians responsible for the apathy and just the high level of uninterested voters we have right now?
I think there's a certain amount of self-help that needs to be done as well. It's too easy to sit there and say somebody else needs to do a better job. But if people don't take an interest, if people don't actually deal themselves into the process, then they can't really just sit there and be critical of the unacceptable or the inadequate outcomes. I have a view that in Australia we could do more to educate younger people to become more active in civics, to become more informed about the choices they need to make.
Well, voting is compulsory in Australia. It's not compulsory in Germany. Mm-hmm. And do you think that's I mean, you have 100% turnout or 99% turnout,
well,
right?
We have on average about 95%, and there have been times when people would have cheered to have been able to get that sort of a voter turnout. And the important thing is we have a very low level of what we call invalid votes. So people actually take it seriously. It's also easy to do. Mostly it's on a Saturday morning, you go down to your local school, somebody's got a barbecue set up, and it's a participative thing.
Thilo?
And I mean, when we talk about voter apathy, I mean, maybe we have to look at it the other way. I mean, politicians, maybe that's the key to their doings. I mean, I think Henry Ford once said, if the people knew how the financial system works, there'd be a revolution the next day. The point is, I think they are glad that that so little people actually
are interested.
Are interested
because you have less lobbying going on. But you see, don't you think the Australians have got it right with this? It's compulsory voting. You don't have a choice, because in Australia they're saying in a democracy it's your responsibility to vote, period.
Well, you just said they don't have a choice, but you call it a democracy? So I don't think so. I mean, I think you should only go to the voting booth if you think you have a choice. And I think that's the huge problem here in Germany, that next month there's a big election and the voters can't see the difference between a Steinbrück and a Merkel. They can't see the difference between the Green Party and Social Democrats.
It is hard. I mean, when you look at what are the differences, where are the charismatic, intelligent leaders in Germany right now? I mean, you have Angela Merkel. She's known for her very...
We don't need no leaders.
You don't need any leaders.
Yeah, that's the future.
Well, who's going to make...
In the young.
Yeah, I mean, leaders always sounds authoritarian, and we're like the younger we get. The younger we are, the more anti-authoritarian we are.
Yeah, but but you need, the way the system is right now, you have a chancellor, for example.
Well,
where are the people coming up who inspire people and make people want to make the country better?
Well, I mean, in the end, it's not about the players; it's about the system. We have to fight and change the political system, and not change the political players.
All right. How would you like to see the political system changed?
Well, make it a real democracy. Make it make people not only go to the voting booth every 4 years, make them participate in a real fashion.
You sound like the Pirate Party with their liquid democracy. No.
Well, that's one approach. I support them because they try something new.
Facebook.
But yeah, I mean,
that's the new politics, and that's the younger politics.
I was going to say, that to me, even in Australia, the rise of social media as part of the political discourse has been extraordinary. You can't find a senior, serious political figure in Australia who doesn't have a Facebook, who doesn't tweet, who doesn't retweet. This is something that I think is changing the way people perceive the opportunities to engage in politics.
It's very disruptive, but I just want to throw this out. I've lived here a long time, and in none of the years that I've lived in Berlin has my political representative sent me anything by mail or made a phone call to let me know that they're there.
Because he doesn't care.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. That's incredibly irresponsible too, but they get away with it.
Well, maybe that's how the system is supposed to work.
So, what do you think your series, Young and Naive, is going to do in terms of the general election? We're running out of time here.
Well, I don't know, but I'm going to talk to Tesch next week, and
what are you going to ask him?
I don't know. How can one become a candidate for chancellor? Because then we.
Pierre Steinbrück, of course, is the man who wants to replace Angela Merkel and be the next chancellor.
And I'm going to ask him how he became the candidate, and if you know how he became that. We talk about democracy again.
Okay, good. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. This was definitely a very interesting selection of guests today. Thank you all for talking with us. That's going to wrap up my agenda this week. Don't forget that you can watch the show again on our website and on YouTube. And don't be shy. Tell us what you think about the show. The inbox, of course, is always open. You see the address right there. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Join me next time when I set the agenda.